Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, we got quite a few stories, including a viewer story. So as always, pull up a stump for all that. And yeah, let's jump into it. Thank you for watching, and there's links in the description if you want to support the channel. This is about the time that I saw a hide behind. I was about 8 years old, I think, and I was living in rural Oklahoma. I'm a white kid with half native family, and it was late at night. We were all watching TV in the living room, and to the left of the living room, there's this very long hallway that leads into a kitchen. I look to my left for some reason, and I see 1/3 of the left side of a solid white torso, and I think, this probably isn't real, and I turn back to the TV. I shake my head a bit to check myself. After doing that, I look back, and I think that it'll be definitely gone. It's not. It reaches out a long, solid white arm and beckons me toward it. I stay with my family, watching TV, pretending not to see it. That old house is abandoned now. The last I heard, it was infested with snakes. I didn't hear about hide-behinds until 12 years later, but I've been seeing weird stuff ever since. So I'm a biologist, and I was out in Fort Campbell, Tennessee, doing biologist stuff. My buddies are setting cam traps on the trees while I'm at the camp trying to get the fire going, and for some reason the fire won't catch. And my friend Bill comes over and sits next to me, and suddenly the area around me feels cold, but since everything is cold, I never really cared about it. And I say, this lint won't make a spark. This shitty equipment. Where's Sam with the lighter? And I keep complaining for a while, and I realize that the person next to me isn't talking. I feel a slight chill creeping up my spine, and I slowly look ahead, and I can see Sam and Bill's flashlights in the woods ahead. Then who the hell is standing next to me? I turn around, and all I see is something black. And after that, nothing. I wake up the next day. Sam and Bill are standing on top of me, and their faces are white as milk. I'm laying in the middle of the ground, and a little bit away from the camp. They said they heard screaming, and when they came, I was gone. They had went around the woods and spent the whole night looking for me, shouting, yelling my name, and all they got was a deep grunt. I try to get up off the ground, and there's immediate pain everywhere. There was bruising all over my body, and when they had tore my shirt off because I couldn't get up, I had torn both of my pectorals as if I was trying to push and fight something away to the point where the muscle tore. I broke 5 ribs and a clavicle. I'm never gonna do field trip work again, and every night, as soon as I feel something just brush against me, I get this sense of panic even now. Here's a story from the Emerald Isle of Ireland. My uncle and his buds were exploring the mountains in Wicklow in the 1990s, and there's a few details that have been changed over the years, so just take it with a grain of salt, I guess. Now, there's absolutely nothing to do at all in the Wicklow Mountains. There's fields and forests, and then more fields and maybe a shed if you're lucky. Him and his friends just want a quiet place to drink and camp. He is with his friends Tom and Declan. Tom is a skittish lad, and he's very skinny and always has been. Declan, on the other hand, is built like a bear. They find a place to camp out eventually, and they're just there with a little barbecue that they had in their little hatchback car. They're just doing the typical stuff. Tom heads off to go pee in the woods, and he's drunk. My uncle and Declan have a laugh for a while, drinking and doing dumb shit as friends always do. Half an hour later, Tom still hasn't come back, and they start looking around for him, and they head off in the woods to go find him. After wandering around the forest looking for him, my uncle manages to lose Declan in the trees, and trips halfway down a hill in the wet mud and lands on something soft. It's Tom. who was staring at my uncle as if he just took a shit on his grandmother. My uncle looks at him for a second, then says, "Tom, what the F are you And Tom interrupts him with a super slow motion point up towards the clearing. My uncle described it as an effing load of pricks in robes staring at a big rock in the middle of the epoxy forest. They're all standing silently still in blue robes and around a tall rock in the middle of the mountains. They haven't noticed my uncle and Tom yet. The two of them just lie there in the mud for nearly 20 minutes in fear. And then suddenly Declan bellows out, "Lads, where the F are yous? For F's sakes, it's freezing out here." The mob spins right around and immediately starts walking towards them. They run like Sonic the shit-scared Hedgehog all the way back to their camp. They start trying to pack up everything, but the mob is walking through the forest toward them. They just leave the stuff they had there, they get in the car, and they drive home. And they're so in shock that they don't remember much of the journey. He refuses to go camping now. There were always rumors of a cult up there for decades, but that's the only proper sighting. My dad's side of the family hails from old Kentucky. Before that, they were Scottish peasants most likely, and they brought over a bunch of weird superstitions that got mixed in with the local German, Irish, and Native American lore. This story is a little different though. It's about a place near my family's home in the mountains. A place my gramps and my pops just called the Holler. So my dad grew up hearing all sorts of stories about the Holler. Most of them came from my gramps, but grandma used to warn him about the place too. If you don't know, a holler is just kind of a dip in the mountains, a low valley basically. Gramps used to tell him about seeing fairies and other crazy things down there. Even Grandma didn't believe those stories though, but he still insisted that the holler was haunted ground and that Dad should keep away from it at all costs. Now these are Appalachian people, so they're pretty poor and they're not all that educated. Still, nobody Dad's age really believed the stories about the holler being haunted ground. But you know how it is, you don't actually have to believe a superstition to still respect it. But my dad and the other kids just kept far away from the holler, just out of respect for their elders. And that's the way it was until my dad's friend Tom got it in him to go down there one day. My dad tried to dissuade him, but nothing worked. That being said, Tom was Dad's best friend, and he couldn't let him go alone, so they went off together. They spent an hour in the holler, and nothing strange happened at all, so the two of them got into the habit of going there and just digging for arrowheads. But one day, Tom noticed a small patch of earth under a tree that looked like it had been recently dug up. After digging around, Tom pulled out a bag, and in the bag was a severed hand. My dad told me that it seemed like maybe the severed hand had been treated with something and then was dried. He thinks this because the hand was very stiff and wrinkled, like a dried piece of meat, and it didn't smell a bit or even seem decomposed, even though it was clearly ancient. Anyway, both he and Tom thought this was a really cool find, but Dad couldn't help but bring up the idea about the holler being haunted ground. He and Tom were worried that maybe that they'd disturbed something by digging up the hand, so they quickly reburied it and left the place altogether, and after that they didn't really go down there as much. But one day, Dad saw Tom walking by the house going in the direction of the holler. He called out, but Tom didn't respond. Dad had chores to do, so he just shrugged it off and went back to work. Well, you might be able to guess what happened next. Tom never came back. Dad didn't even find out until Gramps approached him. He said, "Have you been going down into that holler with that boy, Tom?" he asked. My dad was scared, but he didn't want to lie. "Yes, sir." My grandpa looked incensed. It turns out that Tom's parents had asked Gramps for his help. They were going to go down into the holler to look for Tom, My dad has no idea how they even knew to look down there. They found no sign of Tom except for his shoes and hat. It was found lying underneath the tree where they found the severed hand. When I was 22 years old, the most important man in my life disappeared overnight. At 22, I was married, had a husband, a baby, and a house with a large extended family. My older sister at this time had a 3-month-old baby with a severe respiratory infection, and the situation seemed touch and go at times. I had just started a new job when my husband called and informed me that I needed to come home immediately. I said, "What's wrong with my family?" He replied, "Alex and I are fine, just come home." I frantically left work, immediately thinking, how will I console my sister? Then, just as I crossed my town line, my foot went numb, and immediately I knew it was my father. See, I was a dancer as a kid, and I needed foot surgery in high school, and my dad saw me through it. He actually removed the pin from my foot for the doctor with a pocket tool. She wasn't happy. So I hopped through the front door on one foot and immediately yelled to my husband, "What's wrong with my father?" And I don't really remember much over the next few days. My dad had worked through the night finishing a job, and he fell asleep at the wheel 2 miles from home. Thank God nobody else was injured. How did I know it was my dad? Well, I was always a daddy's girl, and I guess we have a connection far deeper than I understand. This was only the beginning of my dad moments. So, 3 years after my father passed, I was finally pregnant with baby number 2, after a year of fertility issues and many sad moments. My father asked me to never have an only child, and I was determined to honor his request. I was about 7 months pregnant with my daughter, and I was running errands for work. At the time, I owned a little 4x4 to make winters here easier. I was on the way back to the office on Interstate 95, trucking along in the slow lane on a beautiful sunny day. I realized traffic was heavy today, and that the truck in front of me was hauling a lot of boards, and it looked a little shady. However, I realized that I was boxed in and I had nowhere to go, so I thought I will back off a little and take the next exit. I am sure this felt slow, but it happened in seconds. A 6x4 sheet of plywood let go and came flying towards my car. I saw the board, started to panic, and I was still boxed in, so I yelled, "Okay, Dad, speed up or slow down." And inside my head, all I heard was, "Step on it, honey." So I did, and the board landed directly behind my car, scraping the rear roof paint. I had also saved a yellow rose from my father's casket when he passed, and I got it dried out in the windshield of my 4x4. I had no AC and 7 months pregnant. All my windows were cracked, not open wide, maybe a third of the way down. My yellow rose flew out the window during that moment. Was it chance or a gift from my dad? I successfully had a beautiful baby girl named after my father in the following June, so you would think that's it. However, my biggest moments were still deep in my future. Years later, in 2010, I now have 3 children. My youngest was unfortunately with me for the beginning of this one, so I have been diagnosed with MS since I was 29 years old. I have tried just about everything, and nothing seemed to work, so I tried another new doctor. This doctor was trying new medication with me, and one of them was making me incoherent, so I immediately asked to come off that one. Apparently, you're not supposed to drive for up to 2 months after stopping this medication. I had no idea. Of course, we were careful, and I absolutely was not driving at all for about 3 weeks to be safe. That was our decision and not what the doctor told me. So I drove my son to school after my partner did a quick check of my faculties, and my 7-year-old son and I were off to school late that day. Apparently, I blacked out going 45 miles per hour a mile from home, and I hit an 18-wheeler head on. That morning, I took my partner's car at the last minute to save gas, and that car, A Volkswagen Jetta Wolfsburg Edition saved me and my son's life in 2010. See, the engine block in a Volkswagen is in the center of the car, so it broke my right leg and arm instead of going through my chest. My son had to have his head stapled shut, but there was no displacement, and today he is becoming an amazing adult. He got to go home from Boston Children's a day later with his dad. However, I would remain at Beth Israel for another 11 days, and a long-term rehabilitation after, because I had also fractured my spine 27 times and had 2 full lumbar breaks and a cerebral hemorrhage in addition to a crushed leg and wrist. I was put into a medical coma for 2 days to help me endure all these surgeries. However, this was one of the most enlightening moments of my life. I remember the heels of my favorite high school heel boots clicking on the pavement as I walked through what looked like a highway tunnel, and at one end was my dad. He said, "Hi, honey. You were only here to visit. You will need to go home in a few days. You're not done yet." I was so excited to see my dad, and of course I said, "No problem. Let's go get some coffee." So, we did. We went to this old donut shop, and I saw plenty of people who looked familiar, but I wasn't sure until I saw my uncle, who was silent, like everyone else, but smiling at me just the same. He had passed away 2 years after my father. I didn't understand that this was unusual at the moment. I just enjoyed the 2 days of coffee with my dad. At the end, he said, "Let's go, honey. Time for you to go home." And all of a sudden, we were before the tunnel. I quickly turned around and remembered the one thing that bothered me about my dad. Was he scarred or in pain when he died? So I asked, and he said no, I was fine. So I smiled and I walked away. I woke up with my family in front of me, waiting to see if I even knew who they were, and thank goodness I did, but I had a long road ahead of me. One day I woke up in rehab and remembered about what my dad had said, so I insisted that they all come and see me so I could tell them that Dad was okay. Today, I have fully recovered. I am walking around still, and besides being a little forgetful sometimes, nothing truly permanent besides a lot of arthritis, so I believe we go on. I saw my dad, I spoke with my dad, and there was no doubt in my mind. I also had a quick out-of-body during this accident. After my surgeries, I woke up and decided I needed to pee, so I got out of bed with a broken leg and arm and screws in my head to release pressure on my brain, and obviously, very painfully, landed on the floor. Then, I was in the corner of the room, watching myself cry, and thinking, "Hey dummy, you can't walk yet." Weird moments. I saw the nurses putting me back into bed. I assumed my brain couldn't handle the pain that I caused myself, so I was just taking a break in the corner and laughing at myself. So for that story, I would like to thank Camille for sending that one in. I really enjoyed reading it, and I hope that I do your story justice in this video. So, what'd you think of those stories? Let me know what you thought of them down in the comments. The cult in the mountains doesn't really surprise me too much. You never really know what the hell's out there. I remember hearing stories when I was a kid about people seeing people in black robes, blue robes, red robes, whatever color. They'd be back in a field somewhere, burning some stuff, or standing with their arms up in the air, staring at something. Sometimes you could even tell who it was if their parents or family would go, "Yeah, he's a character." As for the hide-behinds, I've never heard them called that, but I've heard similar stories, usually from Japan. I don't really remember what they're called, but it's probably some type of yokai. I just know that if I was sitting somewhere and I saw like a hand come out from behind a big dresser and beckon me over, the last thing I'm gonna do is go over there like, what the hell. For the one in Kentucky, I really figured that kid got kidnapped by the Fae and they're probably not gonna see him again. And the biologist one was interesting because I've heard a similar story before from that general area. Like, the descriptions are obviously different, but they called it the Horned Man. So, I'll try to find maybe some other stories about that or try to figure out some more about that. But other than that, I want to thank you for watching the video. Thank you for liking and subscribing and all that good stuff. Again, there's links in the description if you want to support the channel. And thank you for pulling up a stump, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.